What's up, guys? Connor O'Hanlon here for another episode of the Greater Society podcast. And tonight, there are a number of large news stories that we are going to cover, including Donald J. Trump being charged in a civil suit for sexual assault or slash sexual abuse and defamation, as well as George Anthony DeVolder Santos, the congressman from New York, being arrested on 13 counts. We will dive into that. Then we will talk about, of course, what happened over the weekend in Allen, Texas. The right-wing reaction to it, of course, because they're the ones holding up the progress on this. And, some of the, rhetoric that goes along with that. We'll talk a little bit about Tucker Carlson, of course, because it seems that he's been in the news a lot lately, and he made a decision as to where his new version of the show will end up. But just want to kick off our 50th episode with what originally was supposed to be an interview with Central Bucks School Board candidate Susan Gibson. She couldn't make it tonight, so we will likely interview her next week. But I had an interesting conversation, if you want to call it that, a conversation on Twitter, where I responded to some of Paul Martino's, who many of you know is a right-wing wealthy person. I don't know how wealthy, who is attempting to sway school board elections as he did in 2021 with immense amount of money. And what's interesting here, and I want to push back on, is this. And let me pull it up for you. We find ourselves here where Central Bucks forward, and some of you may have seen these signs. If you live in Doylestown, you live in Buckingham, you live Warrington, New Britain, Chalfont, etc. There are 5 school board seats up for election this year in Central Bucks. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the importance of these seats in a second, and I'm going to talk to you about cross-filing and all that. But I want to lead off with, the juice. Because as our professor would say at Penn, you got to have the juice. And this sign right here, although it's obviously the logo is, for those you might not be able to tell, but I can tell on my screen, the logo is low. It has low fidelity, I guess is probably not the right word, but it's not as crystal clear as it should be for an for a sign like this. But and I apologize, I'm probably going to be coughing throughout this because I have a small cough, but this is one of the signs that is posted all over Central Bucks area. Academics over activism, which, okay, in isolation, that may sound fine. That may seem totally cool, because you know what? Even as a Democrat, I agree we should put academics over activism in schools. However, what does Mr. Martino, who, by the way, has an open invitation to come on the show, I invited him to come on the show. What does he mean when he's talking about activism? Well, let's take a look. On his Twitter page, you'll see it's a 2-tweet thread, largely, and I'll show you the first one. The first one says, I'll zoom in for those who are visual learners. Quote, "What is happening here in Central Bucks School District is exactly what is happening at the Supreme Court." By the way, he's more right than he wants to admit here. Read the sentence below and replace court with school board, and you have the same story. Now, of course, he didn't actually thread this properly. I don't know why, but he just put one out of whatever. And then he links to a National Review article, which, by the way, is extremely right-wing. But second, he says, quote, and he's quoting the article, "Activists have concluded that since they lack ideological control over the court, it must be delegitimized." That's the end of the quote from the story. And then he says, "We certainly know the left's playbook." Now, we will talk about how he doesn't acknowledge the legitimacy of criticisms of the Supreme Court. We can talk about a number of different, perceived hypocrisies or whatnot. But I responded to this. And it's weird, I don't have my blue check mark anymore. But I responded to this. I said, quote, "Activists on the Supreme Court overturned a 50-year precedent to protect a woman's right to choose." That's what happened in the Dobbs case, right-wing activists. And then I said, "Activists on the school board in Central Bucks removed pride flags despite it never being an issue." And I said, "For my 7 years of being in those schools." I said to him, "You just prefer the right-wing activists," which is true. And we'll go further into that. But he responds, quote, "But no comment from you on the fact that it is your goal to delegitimize each institution. You clearly support that." I respond. And he never responded back to any of this. I responded, "My goal is not to delegitimize our institutions, but rather to re-legitimize them. Institutions that lack codes of ethics and transparency have already delegitimized themselves. I believe in public education," he doesn't, "and good governance from all levels. If someone you love," I'm sorry, I was scrolling and that threw me off. "If someone you love is sick, you do what you can to get them the help and medicine they need. I love my community and country, and I refuse to let it fall into the hands of the few who want to squeeze it dry and ignore the basic tenets sought by the founders, a fair shot for everyone. My point being, you want to label people activists, but you are one. The Supreme Court was a, quote, activist court when it ruled on Plessy versus Ferguson, a right-wing decision, and was a activist court when it ruled on Brown versus Board of Education, a left-wing decision. spending hundreds of thousands of dollars isn't activism? Question mark. I left it as. So let's break this part down one by one by one by one by one. All right. So looping all the way back to say academics over activism. This is as uncontroversial as we can get when it comes to school board. We all agree. Activism isn't necessarily the goal of our schools, but the ones that are acting as activists in this scenario are the school board. And he compared the school board to the Supreme Court, which is also acting as, quote, activists. Now, right-wingers, and I have had debates with this formally with friends of mine, colleagues, however you want to say it, that said that the Supreme Court, specifically, I used this exact comparison, Plessy versus Ferguson, and Brown versus the Board of Education, which, for those who don't remember, Plessy versus Ferguson was, I believe, in the 1890s, which ruled that basically segregation was legal. They were implementing a right-wing authoritarian implementation and interpretation of the Constitution, because again, originalist interpretation of the Constitution is bollocks. It doesn't make any sense. It's trash. It doesn't make any sense. You can't take and apply from the late 1700s to 1780s and apply the interpretation of a constitution to today, word for word, explicitly, without taking into account a million other things. So, Constitution is a living, breathing document. That's pretty much beyond what the scope of this talk is, but 1890s, Plessy versus Ferguson. A right-wing activist court decides that it is okay to segregate people based on their race. In, I believe, the 1950s, I think it's like 1958 off the top of my head. I don't have it in front of me, but that's where you have Brown versus Board of Education, and give or take a few years there, but Brown versus Board of Education, which is a, quote, left-wing activist decision, which desegregates schools. It integrates schools based on race, and saying that if you're black, you're allowed to go to a public school with white children. There's nothing in that decision, even though it's, quote, activism, that is bad. When you have activism in politics, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. The same way that small government can be good, like, let's say, not banning pride flags, or small government can be bad, where it's not regulating the lead in your water. Mr. Martino here is an advocate for privatization of education. He doesn't outright say it, and the candidates that he supports don't outright say it. But they are couching their radicalism in broad platitudes that say things like, parents are partners. Yes, parents are partners. Left-wing people agree with that. Academics over activism. Yes, okay, cool. It's not that crazy. Now, their candidates don't represent what the majority of people want here. And, of course, I'm a part of a lawsuit that is making sure that we have fair representation on the school board. Now, I personally don't even necessarily agree with the map that was proposed counter to what the school board proposed, but the school board gerrymandered a map and they put forth their idea, right? We had a counter proposal that said this is an actually fair map. It splits it reasonably fair. We would probably have a 5-4 one way or the other. But if you took Central Bucks School District at the whole and elected people at the whole, at large, like other school districts do, my opinion, this is not borne out exactly by any sort of legitimate fact other than looking at polls, or sorry, looking at registrations, that Democrats would perform better than the Republicans at large. And they refuse to acknowledge it, and they don't care. They just want to put their minoritarian rule and apply it to everybody else. They want to ban pride flags. They want to out kids that are LGBTQ. They want to bully other school board members, school board directors. Tabitha Delangelo, who is not running, is the most qualified person that I've ever seen for a school board, and she was interviewed on the former version of this show. She is the most qualified person I've ever seen talk about education. Should probably be the Secretary of Education, if you ask me. But these people don't think that she knows what she's talking about when it comes to the school district. She has a doctorate based around education. She is a dean now of a school of educators. She is so hands-on with education, and yet her opinion is cast aside because she is in the minority. So when they talk about activism over or academics over activism, it is straight BS. They don't care about anything in that regards, and they just want to put forth their right-wing agenda over what the majority of us want. So I just thought that would be an interesting little introduction. Maybe Paul would like to come on the show and discuss it with me. But quickly, since Susan's not here to talk about it either, next Tuesday in Pennsylvania is primary election day. So if you live in Philadelphia, you get to elect your next mayor of Philadelphia. If you are in, I forget this specific spot, so I can't exactly remember. I believe it's the 160-something district. You get to elect a state representative that will sway the majority in the state house. But if you are in Bucks County, if you are in anywhere else in Pennsylvania, you have school board elections, township supervisor elections, you have, borough council elections, you have your local mayor's elections, everything that is local, all the way up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Now, this is a primary election, except for those, what I was talking about earlier, the state house race. That's a special election. These are primary elections, meaning you have to be a registered Democrat or a registered Republican to vote in those respective primaries. However, the wrinkle here is, for certain judge positions and for school boards, you can do what is called cross-filing. What essentially this means is that if you are, let's say I was running for the Court of Common Pleas. In Bucks County, we have no Democrat that's actually running for the Court of Common Pleas. For whatever reason, I don't agree with it, but it's an easy example for me because I don't have to use any real candidates. Let's just say I'm running, I want to run for the Court of Common Pleas, and I then get on the ballot. But I have to get on the ballot, not just on the Democratic side, but on the Republican side as well. And I have to get Republicans to sign my petition to say he should be on the ballot. And if you do it, you appear on the ballot right next to the real Republican. So if you are a Democrat, you will see registered Republicans on your ballot. So this is why it's important to know who you are voting for. If you're a Republican, you will see registered Democrats on your ballot. And to be clear, if you are a Democrat and you go to the polls on election day next week, it will not tell you the party of either of the candidates. So let's just say I was, again, running for Court of Common Pleas. If it's me and the Republican candidate that is running here, it will not tell you that I am a Democrat and he is a Republican. It'll just say his name, my name. That's it. The same thing goes for school board. In my region, there will be 2 candidates. If you are in certain areas in Buckingham, there will be 3 candidates. When you go to the polls or before you go to the polls, look up who you want to support, because it is not going to be clear who the candidates are. If you live in Central Bucks and you want to combat the activism from Paul Martino, if you want to combat the activism by Dana Hunter, if you want to combat the activism by Jim Pepper, if you want to combat the activism by nutjob wackadoodles, as many pointed out last night, Jordan posted a TikTok of the great entertainment that you see at the school board meetings of Mr. Mackhouse. And if you don't know who I'm talking about, just go watch the most recent Central Bucks School Board meeting, and he goes to the township meetings as well. Local government is where you make this happen, but you gotta make sure that you go out and vote next week, and you gotta know who you're voting for. The same way that if you were voting for the mayor of Philadelphia, you should know who you're voting for between now and then. All right. Now, let's go to Mr. George Anthony DeVolder Santos, who, reporting here by the AP, I believe the original story was actually broke by CNN. I'm going to zoom in here for you. Reading now, U.S. Representative George Santos, infamous for fabricating his life story, which, could you imagine that you're famous for, quote, fabricating your entire life story? This guy lied about where he went to school. He lied about where he worked. He lied about his name. He lied about where he got his money from. And that's what eventually caught up to him here. So, infamous for fabricating his life story, pleaded not guilty Wednesday to charges he duped donors, stole from his campaign, and lied to Congress about being a millionaire, all while cheating to collect unemployment benefits he didn't deserve. Afterward, he said he wouldn't drop his re-election bid, because he's running for re-election in New York, and defied calls to resign. Santos's 13-count federal indictment was a reckoning for a web of fraud and deceit that prosecutors say overlapped with the New York Republican's fantastical public image as a wealthy businessman, a fictional biography that began to unravel after he won the election last fall. So, let me go over to our Twitter, and I'm going to show what his reaction was today. To Chris, we have Chris in chat that asks, do you prefer FedEx or UPS? I want to address this. This is a pressing conversation here. I do want to address this. I prefer neither. I actually support the boys in blue, if you believe it or not. The USPS, United States Postal Service. It is the cheapest, most efficient, and one of the most efficient governmental operations in the country. All right. Here we have George Santos today after he came out of the courtroom.
And benefits when you had a job making
So this is him reacting to a question regarding receiving, I believe, hundreds of thousands. I'll fact check myself, but of unemployment benefits during the COVID pandemic for his business, his, quote, business.
$120,000
$120,000
a year.
Rachel, this is part of my defense. This is inaccurate information, and I will get to clear my name on this. During the pandemic, it wasn't very clear. I don't understand where the government's getting their information, but I will present my facts.
Prosecutors say that you got over. Excuse me. Prosecutors say that you got over $20,000 in unemployment benefits, sir. How is that acceptable?
Ma'am, like I said, my employment was changed during the time. I don't understand where the government's coming from. I'll present my defense.
And one last question for unemployment.
So this guy is absolutely bonkers. He has his. So remember, this is the guy that stole charity money that he was supposedly raising for an Iraq war veteran's dog. He stole the money from him. This guy is the epitome of a dirtbag. He is absolutely insane. And let us then go to Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, responding to this arrest and saying, or being asked, well, should George Santos resign? Should he be removed? What do you think, Republican Speaker of the House?
No. Yes.
Are you going to continue to stand by George Santos now that he's been indicted on federal charges? And will you stand by President Trump after a jury found him liable on sexual abuse?
I'm not going to avoid your question, but as you know, I've been at the White House. I haven't seen that. I haven't seen the indictment, but as you know, with George Santos, I did not put him on any committees. For those like Senator Menendez, who was indicted and we went to trial, he was still able to vote, and others. I believe he's a chairman of a committee today. In America, we'll just follow the same pattern we always have, right? If a person is indicted, they're not on committees, they have the right to vote, but they have to go to trial. If, just like we had a member of Fortenberry, he had the same ability, I removed him from committees, but he was found guilty, and I told him he needed to resign. That is my policies and principles on this, and I'd follow the same pattern.
And Trump being found liable?
So, well, he's not going to answer this question either, but so let's see if Anthony DeVolder, I mean George Santos, I mean Katara Santos, whatever his name is, if he is found guilty, let's see if he is forced to resign or he just runs for election and hopefully loses. The New York Democratic Party should really step up and win there. But we've seen worse fails, I suppose. So let's then jump over to one Republican getting arrested to another Republican that was recently arrested, Donald Trump, who is the failed former president, and now he faces a civil case that he has lost, and a jury has found him liable for a sexual abuse and defamation lawsuit again from E Jean Carroll, who is a writer. And let's just read here. Former President Donald J. Trump, I added the J, but Donald Trump, on Tuesday said he will appeal a Manhattan federal jury verdict that found he sexually abused E. Jean Carroll in a luxury department store dressing room in the spring of 1996. Trump says, we'll be appealing this decision. It's a disgrace. But here's the thing. Trump is liable for it. He was found liable for it and has to pay $5 million. He was found liable by a jury. This is not just some random judge that says you have to do this arbitrarily. This is not just some, he was caught on this tape saying this, which we know that he's said that he basically sexually abuses women on the Hollywood Access tape. And he just says because he's rich, he can get away with it. That's what he believes. So Trump then, I looked back at these quite interesting comments that he had about this case in his deposition. I actually saw a clip from Howard Stern talking about the deposition, and then I was like, oh, it can't be that bad, right? Oh, it's that bad. So here we have Trump looking at exhibits for his deposition, okay? So they're showing him pictures and they're showing him documents, but the former president mixes up, and I am not kidding with you. I will play this in a second. The former president mistakes the woman that he is now liable, has been found liable of sexually abusing. He mistakes her for his ex-wife in this picture. The reason why I'm going to highlight this is because, and I think I have the clip. Trump said, and I quote, "She," meaning E Jean Carroll, "is not his type." And that's why he wouldn't have sexually abused her. That's the type of defense we're working with here. So let's take a look. I'm sure our boy Chris in chat will like this one.
I think so, yes.
And do you recall when you first saw this photo?
At some point during the process, I saw it. That's, I guess, her husband, John Johnson, who was an anchor for ABC. Nice guy. I thought, I mean, I don't know him, but I thought he was pretty good at what he did. I don't even know who the woman, let's see, I don't know who, it's Marla.
It's Marla. Marla Maples.
You say Marla's in this photo?
That's Marla, yeah.
Marla Maples is his
my
former wife.
What woman are you pointing to? No.
Here.
Carol.
Oh, is that,
The person you
okay.
just pointed to was
Oh, I
E Jean
see.
Carroll.
Who is that? Who is this?
Point. And the woman on the right is your then wife,
I don't know,
Ivana?
this was the picture. I assume that's John Johnson, is that
It's Carol.
Carol? Because it's very blurry.
No,
He's just saying it's
I
blurry.
think so, yes.
He mistakes a woman that he says he's never met, that he says never had any contact with, which is obviously now proven to not be the case because he's found liable. In his deposition, he's saying that he doesn't know this woman, but this looks like Marla Maples, who is his, I believe, second wife. There's Ivana Trump, there is Melania Trump, which is now, and in between there was Marla Maples. He is mistaking the woman that he said he has never met for his ex-wife. Now, let's take a look at when he says this about the Access Hollywood tapes.
Just kiss. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything. Grab them by the you can do anything. That's what you said, correct?
Well, historically, that's true with stars.
It's true with stars that they can grab women by the
Well, that's what it's. If you look over the last million years, I guess that's been largely true. Not
The last million years. The last million years. Now, even if you think that Jesus Christ was a superstar, like the Broadway musical, that was 2,000 years ago. If you look at the last million years, oh my God.
Not always, but largely true. Unfortunately or fortunately.
Chris, close your ears here, buddy. Quote, unfortunately or fortunately, that's how it is. Let's just rewind that a second.
that they can grab women by the
Well, that's what it's. If you look over the last million years, I guess that's been largely true. Not always, but largely true. Unfortunately or fortunately.
and you consider
And he's smiling. Look, you can see him. He's smiling. He is grinning while he's saying this. He is smirking while he's saying it. It's absolutely insane. It is. Look, this is only going to get worse for the former president, Donald J. Trump, as he gets closer and closer to the general election. Now, this seems to be the last arrest. Remember, the first time he got arrested, it actually helped him in the polls against Meatball Ron. I'm sure now, the second time, people on the right probably aren't even going to pay attention to this. But if there's any changes to it, I don't believe that this will impact Republican primary polls. But it definitely will continue to erode his support in the general election, in my opinion. There is still the Georgia election fraud case, the fake election fraud case, that he was trying to pressure officials to overturn a legitimate election in Georgia. And boy, oh boy, they're going to come after him, and rightfully so, and he will likely be arrested for the second time. I'll highlight this because he is found liable in this case because it's a civil case. This is not a criminal case because the statute of limitations it was originally a rape case, was beyond the criminal statute of limitations, right? So this is a civil case just meaning that she was seeking damages against him, and obviously he's found liable, so there's some culpability there, and there is some justice for what he did. Some. That's the key there, because this guy is obviously a predator and shouldn't be around women and shouldn't be around the White House or the nuclear football, for that matter. So let's take a I don't know if I want to dive into this first or what, but there's limitations to what I want to discuss about what happened in Allen, Texas last week or over the weekend. But we have to talk about it, and we have to continue to talk about it. And there's one aspect of things that I think we really have to grapple with. So we'll talk about what happened first. Here's an article from the Dallas News. This is from Allen, Texas. Happened right outside of Dallas, I believe. The story says, and for most of you guys probably know what happened, but I'm just going to continue to make sure that everyone's on the same page here. 4 days have passed. I believe this is written today. Either today or, 10th today. Okay. 4 days have passed since a gunman opened fire at an outdoor mall in Allen, Texas. 8 people were killed, 7 were wounded. Over 1,000 people found themselves at or near the mall when the shooting took place, many eventually being escorted away from the property by law enforcement and having to return later to retrieve their vehicles. So, 8 people were killed, including an 11-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 3-year-old. For those who frequent the, quote, last bastion of free speech, according to Tucker Carlson, Twitter, you may have seen video from the shooting, and you may have seen pictures and clips of people that were killed. And this is a tough thing to say, but with some acknowledgement that we have to be aware and discuss things with the families of victims, I think that things like that need to be shown. I think that the same can be applied to war, right? If you don't know, we've talked about this before. I think I've talked about it on this show. I've talked about it on the older iteration of the show, at least. During the Iraq War, it became illegal to show the caskets, not just the bodies, the caskets of American soldiers that died overseas. We as Americans should know and have a right to know what this, quote, freedom is doing to our country. I saw a number of pictures and videos of the shooter after he was killed, as he got shot in the head. I think that the carnage and devastation that is brought to this country day in and day out, because there has been at this point, I'm sure, over a dozen. It was about, it was at least 10 yesterday. Mass shootings, not just shootings, mass shootings since this one happened. There was another guy that ran people over in Texas right after this. The violence in this is largely, and I know I just used an example of something that is not guns. The violence is driven by access, and extremely easy access, for mentally unhinged and ideologically radical, typically young men that go and commit these crimes. Now, I want to say, of course, you have to say what the victim's family would want. You have to, get certain. I think that is a barometer that we should use. And it's a bare minimum of respect that we should have. But I also believe, and I actually found it interesting, that Jake Tapper, I was watching it on Sunday morning before I went and worked out in my backyard, asked Republicans about this and said, should we be showing this stuff? Because that might be the only way that people make a difference. There are people that say we shouldn't say the shooters' names. That's fine too. That's a part of it. But until the average American sees what an AR-15 can do to a body, I don't think that everyone understands how much damage it can do to somebody. When you see somebody's face blown off, I'm not exaggerating, that is traumatic. And I'm not saying, oh, I want everyone to be traumatized. No, I want people to be safe. Passing common sense gun reforms that we talk about what seems like every single week. License, registrations, insurance, trainings. High capacity magazine bans. Certain guns should be banned, believe it or not. This should be, as I feel like I say this every time, this should be unacceptable. That a Nazi piece of shit as easy, and I'm not exaggerating, I'm not going to show this tattoos on the screen. This guy had SS tattoos on his arm and a swastika on his chest, and people are questioning what ideology he was espousing. He was a right-wing, authoritarian fascist that, now the record shows, was inspired and was impacted by allegedly, but this is what reporting has said, the right-wing online YouTube and TikTok media like Libs of TikTok and Tim Pool and Tucker Carlson and these folks that lead down the radical right. This was not a, fascist that people threw the term around. This was a literal Nazi that killed 8 people because he had easy access to a gun. People want to blame mental health again and again and again and again and again and again, but don't ever care to invest. They don't ever care to look. I'm on a nonprofit board for mental health. I understand the need for it. I care about it. The largest provider of mental health services in this country is Medicaid, and Republicans never, in fact, I bet you if I looked it up, let me see. Okay. As I just said, Medicaid is the largest mental health provider in the United States. The Affordable Care Act expanded Medicaid, where the federal government pays the bill for the state to expand Medicaid, to give more people access to health care. And Texas, where this shooting happened, where it is run by majority Republicans, and Greg Abbott, the Republican governor, has the authority, the sole authority. The governor has the sole authority to give thousands of people health care for free, refuses to, because they choose not to expand Medicaid based on the Affordable Care Act, because they are ideologically opposed to Obamacare, and they're ideologically opposed to universal health care, and they're ideologically opposed to helping the poor, the sick, and the mentally ill. They wave it as a white flag to say, here we go, we can't do anything about it, don't politicize it, don't talk about the guns, don't talk about anything other than mental health, but we're not going to do anything about mental health because we don't like Medicaid, we don't think everyone deserves health care, but don't come for the guns, don't talk about the high-capacity magazines, don't talk about licensing, registration, safety, training, insurance, none of that. We won't talk anything about that. We banned bump stocks, so we're okay. We won't do anything, because here's the thing. We banned the AR-15, which is not going to happen, by the way, but let's just say we did it. Okay, well, now the next thing is going to be that there's ghost guns, which are 3D printed guns, which apparently, gun owners don't like that term, but that's what they're called. They're ghost guns. They're hard to pick up. They're not metal, and they can commit the same amount of force, basically, and impact the same amount of carnage in a shooting, essentially, as one of these guns can. We have to start to grapple with the idea that as we loop back to what Paul Martino was talking about, the quote, not at all activist Supreme Court that in 2008 decided solely that you as an individual have a right to bear any arm, essentially, that you did not have. This is something that I should be bringing up every single week. Until 2008, I'm going to bring up the actual case. In 2008, there was a Supreme Court case called the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. versus Heller that ruled that the Second Amendment applies to every single individual having the right to owning a gun. And it ignores the clause, of course, that says to form a well-regulated militia, meaning regulated, and theoretically a militia is not the same as just an individual, but the Supreme Court, which is an activist right-wing Supreme Court, even at that time, it has only been worsened now, ruled in that favor, putting the money in the pocket of gun manufacturers, putting money in the pocket of the NRA. As they disregard gun safety, they're not held liable. I used to feel my personal feeling on this has changed. I didn't used to think that gun manufacturers should necessarily be held liable for mass shootings because you could use a pencil as a weapon, right? You could use something sharp, a knife. Somebody that makes a knife, should that be considered blah blah blah, right? Guns are solely made and used for killing. If a gun is utilized in a mass shooting, if a gun is utilized in a shooting, just in a gang violence or in day-to-day violence, in a domestic abuse situation, the gun manufacturer should be liable for it. I evolved on that, and I believe that that is something that we should really be looking at implementing across this country. Because otherwise, unless it hits the bottom line, the gun manufacturers won't give a shit. The NRA won't give a damn. And while the NRA is paying the Republican Party, they will not give a damn. They didn't care after Sandy Hook. They didn't care after Uvalde. They don't care now. And they're not going to do anything about this. And they're going to LARP. They're going to say, we can't do anything about this. It's this guy is a lone wolf. That's not the case. There are mass shootings after mass shootings after mass shootings. And this is just the normalcy that we're living in America today. Just so we are on the same page. Since May 7th, so this is a little out of date here, but this is what we have reported for the gun violence archive. In the month of May so far, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. And that's as of the 7th. 22 mass shootings as of the 7th. Mass shootings, which means that at least 3 people were injured. This has got to change, and the refusal to it is, as Lindsay's pointing out in the chat, the Republicans are not pro-life. They're putting their campaigns, they're putting their re-election, they're putting money ahead of anything else, basically. And the safety of the American people, of course, is thrown out the window because what do we matter? We're just the people, right? We're just the people. But, I don't even feel like playing this idiot on Blaze TV. That's all I have for you guys today. If you guys enjoy the show, I know this last part was super uplifting. Be sure to hit the subscribe button down below to help us reach 200 subscribers, as we are now celebrating our 50th episode. Yeah, to the point in chat by CB, I think the left, a quote, I'm quoting him right now. I think the left is facing a very difficult, near impossible battle to pull the rational gun owners to the vote left. So the problem here is that people that vote, there's 2 people that vote on as guns being their number one issue. You have, this is my interpretation. I'm sure, if my boy Sam Mashy is in the chat, he could pull the polling for this, but from my interpretation of prior polling and from my understanding of working in politics in the suburbs, there's 2 people that are impacted by this. There are the actual gun owners themselves, the people that want to fire Barrett 50 cals, and they want to have, AKs, and they want to have their war memorabilia. Although I think most collectors of old school guns understand that the modern gun is not the same. I've had a debate about whether the founding fathers knew about fully automatic weapons, which they didn't, but there was a schematic of a prototype at one point when they were alive, which was used in an argument against me to say that they knew about the capacity. They did not know about fully automatic weapons. That is, and they never intended for anybody to have that. Again, looping back to the Supreme Court, talking about what Mr. Martinez is saying, that the Supreme Court is not activist, basically. The living document theory is the only rational understanding of the Constitution, because originalist Constitution interpretation, from their point of view, wouldn't make sense for them to hold, to have access to a fully automatic weapon. The same way that they don't believe that I should be able to own a rocket launcher, an RPG. They don't believe that I should have a javelin that can shoot down helicopters. No, nobody in their right mind would believe that I should be able to have that, or you should be able to have that. Nobody in their right mind should believe that you could have a bomb. Nobody in their right mind thinks that you should be able to have a nuke. These are arms. The line that we draw is arbitrary. The problem is that is one side of the coin. The only other people that vote with the gun issue being their number one issue is kind of what Lindsay alluded to in Up Above, when talking about moms and being in that suburban area where gun violence impacts the places that we live around. So for us in Bucks County, Philadelphia has a ton of violence. It's not gang violence. It's actually, we actually at Penn had a big class about this, but it's about, basically like Instagram beefs, which is stupid, but that's essentially what it is. But also in suburbs, pretty much suburban moms, and I can throw dads in there, but they're not the ones that vote with this as their primary issue. You can look at it, suburban white women, largely swayed by violence in schools, gun violence. So if you take the numbers there, maybe they cancel each other out. Maybe there's more suburban women that will vote Democrat. I mean, that's the suburban women, on top of a swing in working class people, just broadly, towards Democratic policies, has been the key to Democratic victories in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, and in Arizona. These are the people that make the election go towards the Democrat. That's just the case. So when we look at the balance here, it is a tough thing. And in fact, I don't want to ban gun ownership. I believe in responsible gun ownership. But what I think is responsible, and what maybe Cletus from, the middle of the state we might have vastly different things of what is reasonable. But even the majority of NRA members believe that there are things that we should be doing that are different. And I'll leave you with one more quote there. A quote from CB in chat. If guns aren't the problem, and the problem is people, then why would you advocate giving the problem access to guns? Guns are the force amplifier. They are the things that help perpetuate violence, mass killings, mass injury. You don't see this in other countries. And we don't have to live like this. We don't have to live like this. I am trying to, this is a total tangent, but one of my classmates gave a presentation about a book called Stolen Focus, and everybody loved this presentation. I actually went out and bought the book, and I'm reading it, and I'm trying to get the author on the program. But a lot of what he talks about in the book is highlighting the fact that whether it's pollution, whether it's our diets, whether it's social media, or guns, he doesn't say guns, but I'm throwing guns in this category. We don't have to live like this. It is the overarching narrative of this show, but every policy is a choice. Every problem, every issue that we face in this country is a political choice in which our politicians prioritize and deprioritize. If we want to address guns on the state and local level, they can do it. On the federal level, they can do it. If we want to address social media giants, eroding our ability to focus, if we want to address oil companies polluting our water, if we want to address, I mean, the number of companies that basically poison our food, we can do that. You and I can unite and say our individualistic things. You know, I'm going to teach my kid how to react to a mass shooting. That's great. You probably should. You probably should. But systematically, that is a failure of the American government. It is a failure of the Pennsylvania government. In this case, it's a failure of the Texas government to take action that preemptively protects our citizenry, our brothers and sisters. We have a choice, and we have a choice every election, and every election, like we have on Tuesday, that there's a primary election, you have a choice. You can elect somebody that is going to prioritize your values, or you can sit it out. You can let somebody else, you can let that gun nut choose. You can let the guy with the swastika on his chest, you know, he can't vote this time because he's dead. But somebody out there is just like him. And if you sit out, that guy is not sitting out, and that vote still counts. We all have the same vote. So if you don't utilize it, if you don't use your power in the democratic process, you can't even say that we're trying anymore if you're not voting, if you're not engaging in the electoral process, if you're not engaging then in activism, which Mr. Martino doesn't want us to do. Activism can be good. Electoralism can be good. And that's not to say every Democrat's perfect. They're not. But don't elect people that don't give a damn about protecting kids, about protecting you, and about protecting your family, about helping you put food on your table, about helping you earn more money. New jobs came out for this last month. The unemployment rate is at a historic low, 3.4%. African American unemployment is at a historic low in this country. That is under Democratic rule. That's not all because of Biden. But if you actually want to implement and better the lives of people and say that you deserve a living wage, you deserve to have health care, you deserve to have the right to retire, you deserve the right to live with dignity, then you should not be voting for the Republican Party. That is what I will leave you with today. Hit the subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube. Hit the thumbs up if you're watching to make sure that we get boosted in the algorithm. If you are on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok, you can follow the show. Well, the show's not on Twitter, but you can follow the show at Greater Society Media on all of those platforms except Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter at Con O'Hanlon. You can support the show for as little as $3 a month at patreon.com/Greater Society Media. You can listen to the program, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you get your podcasts. The audio version comes out a day after we do the live stream. But remember, every Wednesday night, for those who don't know, every Wednesday night we do the show live on YouTube. So when you see me interacting with the chat, you can be a part of this chat by joining us live every Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. And lastly, not to forget, we have a Discord server. If you are watching on YouTube, or if you are listening on the Apple Podcast, or you're listening on Spotify, you can go to the description of this episode, click the link in there to join the Discord server and keep the conversation going, where you can discuss suggestions for the show, local issues, or anything under the sun. But until next week, please stay safe, and if you are in Pennsylvania, make sure that you either return your mail-in ballot or you go out and vote next Tuesday. Make your voice heard in the primary election. Until then, stay safe. Peace.